Hey there. Hello. Welcome to another edition of Realities. I'm your host, Mark Fonseca Rendeiro. And for those of you who have been following the program, this is part 2 of a conversation with Matthew Dons, our friend in Tokyo, who is, we say, fighting cancer, fighting for more time on Earth with his family. And in this time, we've been talking about things like homeschooling, the future, how he sees things, how he'd like to see things, and especially for his children. And that's where we pick things up today. So let's get right back to it. Matthew Dons in Tokyo. So what's your take on, and including, when you teach in your home, but I'm also curious generally, on the idea that I think was very much sold or born in when we were in school, the idea that your career, you should follow your dream and then make your dream into a career. And that, the dominant idea these days of, or at least among some circles, that you will be able to do a job that you love. That's the new solution, right? Unlike that time we were talking about where you did a job you hated. Nowadays, it seems like, especially at universities and institutions, they say, look, the new thing is do what you love and you'll never feel like you've worked a day in your life or whatever it is. For me, it always sounds wonderful, but in practice, I look around at the world and I wonder how possible that is. What is your take on it, and how do you, if you teach that at home? I'm very curious.
So I think it's something where you have to be very, very, very protective of the thing you care about, because if you pursue, let's say, a career for the love of it, you will often find that the aspect that you really liked is the one that's minimized in your work, not necessarily through automation, but just, think of teaching as being an obvious example.
Yeah.
People that go into teaching for the love of education and the idea of educating people and get stuck in a system that is, destructive, poisonous, or any system that, any sufficiently complex system naturally protects itself, because it's very hard for anyone in a system to imagine that system not being there. So, teachers might have a meeting at school about how to improve the school, but it would be very strange if they started the meeting by saying, should we have a school? Are we necessary? Although interesting, your friend Gabe pointed out something I had not occurred to me, is that now teachers might be asking not what does the school offer to the children, or the university students, if we talk about university, but what does the educational institution offer to the teacher? Because Gabe was pointing out, and it goes right to the heart of your question of, now we do have these options of, I love education, I hate the education system, I'm going to use YouTube or Udemy or Khan Academy, or, Gabe reeled off a list of possibilities. He was saying, look, the university lecturers are now starting to think not, is university relevant to the students anymore, but is university relevant to me when I can go out and find the students myself, or put myself in a position where the students find me. And I think for people who really pursue that, they're the ones that are getting to design their life. So, let's say you really care about. I heard the interview you did with your mother recently about education and social work and that kind of thing. There will be options now for, let's say social work. Instead of being a social worker in a system that you hate, now you could say, well, let's get a bunch of people who care about social work and dislike the system that we're in, and let's build our own system. Let's be an NPO that does crowd-funded projects, and we go out into the streets without government oversight, and we get to protect the bit that we really care about, because we know rather cynically, unfortunately, but honestly, that the system is bigger and more powerful than us and will crush us within it. And we might go in with naive thoughts of changing the system from the inside and being that inspirational teacher or whatever it is, or the honest police officer who goes into the police system and
tries to change it from the inside.
And maybe that's also another good example, is that you could, instead of saying I'm gonna go into the police and I'm gonna root out the corruption and the white collar crime, we can say, well, okay, I'm going to do crowd-funded research into corruption and publish it via WikiLeaks. We now have those options. The crime-fighting investigative journalist can say, I'm not going to work for a big newspaper or TV station. Yeah. I'm going to, go the bicycle mark route of citizen journalism. Right?
Yeah, the concept was always, or it became, exactly as you said. I know that the system has the following... I know that the system has the following limitations. I know that the system is bogged down by something, so I'm going to go around the system and go, some people say directly to people. That's one way to phrase it, but also just, this is a solution to freeing yourself from the institutional, limitations. I don't know. You put it better than me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, often technology it can be a part of that, because, now, in a sense, we do have, it's like, the media is becoming narrower and narrower and narrower, and yet our access to the people is becoming wider and wider and wider. There's obviously we've got the problem of signal-to-noise ratio and that kind of thing. Yeah. But
the authority of the institution is what we have lost.
I'm talking now into quite an old MP3 recorder. But if you just think, only a few years ago, when you saw, like a BBC journalist, BBC reporter out on the street, they'd have a sound person with them, and the recording gear would fit into a suitcase, and be lower quality than the MP3 recorder sat on my desk. You and I are talking for free, although I'm in Tokyo and you're in, presumably, Amsterdam. We're talking for free on Skype. So these kind of these technologies are enabling, but also I guess there's at least some people are far more willing to entertain the possibility that things don't have to be done in the same way that they were in the past, and that you don't necessarily have to go through those institutions. That there are ways you can practice medicine without working for a huge hospital. If you really care about medicine, you could go into you could come out of medical school and go into a so-called developing country and be the head of a huge hospital. Now there are people in the so-called developing countries who are don't have access to the medical school, but they do have access to YouTube, where they can watch the top surgeons in the world lecturing on surgery.
Already in the early 2000s, I mean, these are simple examples, but they're beautiful examples. I was an English teacher in Portugal, and there were a number of students of mine had just started in terms of school, but they already spoke fluent English with either UK accents or British accents or American accents, and the biggest reason was the content they had been consuming using whatever technology at home. They had never been to any of these places. They didn't even have many in-person friends, but they had all other resources that really had a big impact on them. And that was then. I mean, it's been 12, 15 years since then.
Yeah. So when I'm talking to pursuing my son Edward about this kind of thing, I don't know what technologies and opportunities he's going to have in the future, but the principles will be the same. That sort of the few people who really get to grips with these stuff, like the early adopters, for example. I'm now speaking to one of the pioneers of podcasting, Bicycle Mark. You were one of the early people who used the handheld MP3 recorders. Going out into famously you went out into the market in Amsterdam. It's the people that get to grips with this stuff kind of early on. They're going to get the advantage very quickly. I don't mean advantage over other people, but I mean advantage over kind of the reality of dull existence, maybe. So, things like teaching my son how to learn quickly, how to research stuff by himself, how to question things. I do a lot of magic with him, kind of close-up magic, and kind of looking at how magic tricks work, so that he's sort of not easily fooled by things. And whenever we look at whatever media it is, whatever sort of, how do we know this is true? Here's a photo, but what was not in the photo? Like what was shown just, standing just beside this person was someone else. There's what you might call media literacy now, I guess, or critical, people talk about media literacy and critical thinking skills.
Critical thinking,
And that's just like such a fundamental thing. It's almost bizarre to think of them as concepts in their own right. Like it should be so obvious that any bit of content you see, you question the source, the motivation, the media. The Marshall McLuhan thing of the medium is the message. How does the medium that I'm getting this via, how does that affect what I think the message is? If it's like we know that video replaces memory and photo enhances it, generally speaking. So if you want to have good memories from a holiday, you should take photos. You shouldn't shoot video, because as you watch the video, it kind of accelerates the degradation of the memory. Whereas photos actually kind of refresh it, because I guess your brain has to do a little bit more work to think of remember the context of the photo. So these kind of things are like just the typical things I do with my kids. So I guess now maybe we could talk about just like the actual mechanics of homeschooling, I guess.
Sure. Look, the one thing is many people may imagine, okay, so it's school at home, so you must wake up bright and early, and you must do what, like a full day. I think they often take what they know of school and they just figure you must have this very structured home schedule. Is that the case?
I think some people do that. Some people talk about things like unschooling, kind of like a very opposite approach, or deschooling. Like if your children were at school and then you realize the error of your ways, and kind of how do you deschool them? What do you do to undo the damage done by industrial schooling? So in my case, is very, very, very unstructured. I did. So there's this kind of underlying thing that I just think, how does anyone have time for their kids to be at school? Because like if you're a parent, presumably you like your children quite a lot. Like how do you have time for them to be at school? So today, just like today, my son and I, we spent quite a lot of time watching Weird Al on YouTube, and that takes quite a lot of time. I mean, just watch, if you just think like watching YouTube videos, that's quite a time-consuming thing. So, recently we've been Talking Heads, Weird Al, Michael Jackson. My son's getting into Michael Jackson.
Wow.
So just, if you think of like a typical day, well, you need to watch some good music videos. For young kids, just, I think it's really important that they have a lot of time that's just their time, kind of with no restriction, no supervision, just sort of, if my son wants to like play with Lego for a few hours, that's kind of, I really don't want to be in the way of that. Socializing as well. So our local school finishes at, I think, 3:10. So usually by 3, kind of the only kind of structure that we have is like basically at 3:30, my son is going to be in the park every day playing with the kids. Wow. That's kind of the only kind of structure that we impose on anything.
And by the way, what do you see happening? I'm curious about the possible friendships and connections with other kids when you do go to the park. I mean, I guess this has been going on for some years, but I'm curious what you observe.
There is almost nothing to observe, really. Just occasionally, if a new kid comes along to the park, they might ask another one of the kids about introducing themselves to each other or whatever. And they might they might hear that my son doesn't go to school, and they'll just say, "Oh, he's really lucky" or whatever. And so because I think for a lot of kids, like the second they physically leave the school, it's like a switch is flicked. They don't want to be dwelling on whatever happened at school today.
Right.
Like you never see in the park, you never see like a continuation of whatever was at school. Then the kids are not like saying, "Oh, let's revise our Japanese, writing or whatever." In Japan, like the writing system is quite cumbersome, to put it politely. So learning to write is a really big deal in Japan. Learning to read and write is a really big deal in Japan. You don't see the children in the park like going, "Oh, let's continue our Japanese language lesson."
No.
Right. You just don't see that. So yeah, there's kind of I remember just reading research about kind of how, like, is there a difference between the level of social adjustment for kids who went through regular schooling and who went through homeschooling? And the only difference is generally kids who went through homeschooling tend to be better socially adjusted, because to form relationships with other people, kind of healthy relationships, one of the most important things is self-esteem. And nothing destroys self-esteem more, I think, than industrialized schooling. And they replace it with this thing that's called conditional self-esteem. So like where kids feel good about themselves on the condition that they're being praised by the teacher or whatever. So, the kid does well in the mathematics test and the teacher says, "Well done, that was great." And then the kid feels good about themselves. And they're kind of this conditioned thing, like Pavlovian conditioning, where the child is sort of conditioned to only feel good about themselves when they're praised by an adult. And that's a very, very unhealthy thing that I think leads to a lot of mental anguish in later life as well. And I guess, maybe does prepare you for working in a factory or working in an office, which is essentially just a factory that deals with paper instead of a physical product.
Do you have any inkling as you observe him? And actually, I'm curious in general what characteristics you see emerging, but we'll get to that in a second. When he faces in the future and I can't even think of the situations right now, to be honest, but so he has a lot of freedom, autonomy, but what happens when confronted with the opposite, right? I don't know, again, do you get an inkling as to, would he be able to handle it when confronted with something more conventional in terms of what's required of him?
Well, I think this also gets to a really interesting aspect of homeschooling, that although it's called homeschooling, I don't think of much of it as going on physically in the home. So it's quite interesting, when we talk about, like when I talk to other parents in Japan, they often say things like, "Oh, so first of all, how can he make any friends?" And I sort of say, well, he goes to his swimming lesson once a week. He goes to the park every day. These are the same, the park and a swimming class or whatever, they're full of the children, exactly the same children who go to the school. But and also, they say like, oh well, it's not good to be in the home all the time. It's like, well, we're not physically in the home much of the time. I mean, recently I am because of my health, I guess. But my kids, I think they've been out in the what you might call the real world far more than kids of their age typically would. So things like we've visited factories. Right? So in Japan, lots of factories run these factory tours. So we went to a brewery, a water treatment works, chocolate factory, which of course my son loved. But we're not like sat in the house studying the Bible or whatever, which I get, potentially I guess some home, because of course one reason some people homeschool is for religious beliefs, and for me it's kind of, as a card-carrying militant atheist, it's almost the other way around.
Yes. Your faith is strong in a different way.
Yeah. So I think that this idea of like what happens when he goes out into the real world, it's like, I'd say it's kind of almost the opposite thing, that like he's already had much more exposure to that than a normal, than a regular 8-year-old child. But also it is like actually the freedom thing is an issue that we tackle very, very directly, and that, I discuss freedom a lot with Edward. And we discuss it in terms of two things, which I think everyone should think about freedom in terms of what do you want to be free from, and also what do you want to be free to do, because those are two kind of related concepts, obviously. But I think you have to kind of look at both of them, kind of financial freedom, financial stability, or whatever, freedom of expression, just the regular things. But I'm talking about those things to an 8-year-old. But also he brings them up himself a lot of the time. So, for example, recently a friend of mine gave him a ukulele. So my son's been playing around with this ukulele, and obviously, we go to YouTube for stuff. So he, went on YouTube, and he happened to find a video of, it was called "Creepy Kindergarten Kids Playing Guitar," and this was a video of North Korean kindergarten children. It's quite a famous video, just horrific. These sort of robotic kids with these tiny little kids who have obviously been conditioned to play the guitar perfectly for our great leader. I forget the current North Korean leader, but
Jong-un.
Yeah, but that kind of brought up a whole discussion of what it's like living in North Korea, how it's different to living outside of North Korea, how it's the same. And obviously, I point out that a lot of things are the same. And, so it's very kind of interesting that as an 8-year-old, he is already bringing up the subject of freedom. It's already something that he's aware of. I very much doubt any of the 8-year-old kids on our local community know what the word freedom means in even a very superficial sense. And it's not something that probably comes up in their general conversation. So it's a very interesting point. Is sort of, for me, homeschooling is not about protecting the kids from the evil society. It's far more of let's tackle it head on. Prepare for it, go out into it, see how it works, see how it doesn't work. It's not kind of I guess there's a very strong image of I think, especially for English people, think of homeschooling, we think of Americans in the countryside or Americans in the city shut inside with the parents basically creating this weird artificial world where protons and neutrons cling together by the love of God, not by nuclear attraction, this kind of thing, and they teach intelligent design and whatever. And I think that that's a very strong image of homeschooling, of sort of withdrawing from society. Whereas for me, it's kind of the opposite. And I guess it was quite a smooth thing because, before my son was of school age, obviously I teach English from home, work from home. So he was always meeting far more adults than, children of his age usually would, and was always meeting adults in contexts that children of his age usually wouldn't meet adults in those situations. So, I took him to Tokyo Hackerspace many times. So, he's has that experience. I took him to the Chaos, Chaos Communication Congress.
Oh, Congress, yeah.
Yeah. And a hacker camp in the UK called Electromagnetic Fields. So he's met adults in those contexts that usually not many kids would be in that situation. So I think, thinking about just how significant that is, that one of the really kind of rotten things about industrial education is the kind of crash when you come out into the real world and you're ill prepared for it, and especially if you think of imagine in many countries leaving school at 16, there's a lot of stuff going on inside a 16-year-old anyway, regardless of society, education, financial pressure. This is a lot of changes happening to us at that time. There's a kind of bizarre crash. Well, that's not something that my kids are ever going to experience because they are in the real world now. My son talks to adults as equals now, hopefully not in a precocious, pretentious, annoying way. Fortunately, he's still quite shy, so that fortunately puts a damper on things, which is good.
Okay.
But he's interacting with adults in I don't want to say an adult way, but at least an adult context, as opposed to a typical 8-year-old kid meeting the parents of a friend, of a school friend, in a very different kind of situation, right? Very, very different context. Very, very interesting, actually.
What would you like to happen for him as we go forward? I mean, he's still very young, and so there's plenty of time in terms of education, teenage years, of course, as well. When you think about it, would he continue in the homeschool track? What would, for example, I mean, we briefly touched on university and university experience. Is that something you would like for him? I understand to a certain extent you want him to do what makes him happy. I mean, that's a given, I think, listening to you. But what would you, I don't know, what would you want for him when it comes to the world of education in the coming years on his way to adulthood?
Yeah, I think the university is a very, very pertinent point, and I think it's difficult for us to imagine now. Again, he's 8 years old.
Yeah.
When he is 18, again, I would be very, very surprised if there are universities in the way that there are now. So if you think So in England, I think Oxford University is 1,000 years old, something like that, right? Most of the universities in England are less than 30 years old, right? And again, when I was a child, most people didn't go to university. Now in England, I think we're just reaching the point where about half of the population do go to university. But it's very, very telling that the top Ivy League universities in the US are putting all their lectures online for free. You can go onto iTunes U and see lectures, not from some, let's be rude and nasty, not from some crummy community college. You see lectures from Harvard, MIT, Caltech, whatever. So it's very, very telling that it's the so-called elite universities. They realise that maybe they don't think their days are numbered, but at least they understand that they can't continue in the way that they've been doing, because just people's expectations are so different. Now we expect the whole kind of time shifting thing that we sort of, when I was a child, when you watched a TV show, it was on live, and you had to be sat in front of the TV when it was going on. And now we wouldn't dream of that, I guess. It's a very strange idea to say, look, I have to be home at 5 o'clock to watch this TV show. Most people are, time shifting to a massive degree. And I think education is going to be no different. So, again, I don't imagine he would go, I just don't imagine that the educational institutions we have in place now are going to be around in the same form in the future. But also, one of the things that I talk about a lot with him is that the other kind of really big lie that I was taught growing up in England, the huge lie was that you get one chance, that there is this one path, and that if you, and it's particularly, I guess, a middle class thing, that if you stray off that path, you have done permanent, irrevocable damage to your life chances. So, and it's something people often ask about homeschooling. They say, oh, well, how could he go to university? Well, again, I point out that, in England, the exams that you take to get into university are public examinations. Anyone can do them, whether they're registered with a school or not. In England, there's two ways of getting into university. There's like the admission system, which I think is called UCAS, the University and College Admission System. So that's like a centralised system for applying for university, where you fill out centralised forms and these get sent on your behalf to universities. But also every single university can directly handle admissions as well. And these are used for what in England is called mature students, which basically means anyone who is over the school leaving age, basically. So you can just apply to any university directly anytime. And, I always just kind of, it's like one of the few things I really believe in drilling into kids is that one of the central lies of society is that you get one chance and there's one path to do things. I mean, if someone wants to go to university and they haven't been through the formal education system, there are 10,000 ways they can go to university. I mean, just saying to the university, I did not go to school. I would really like to go to university. What should I do? And the university will say, oh, well, that's very difficult, but actually we can do this, 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 and this. So I think what I want for my children, I guess, is that they have plenty, whatever happens, they know that they have plenty of options open to them, and whatever options are not open to them, they can find a way to open up those options. Just on the point of university, I'd much rather my son started his own university than went to someone else's. And I think probably quite likely something, he would do something like that. What do I want for him as an adult? I guess comes back to the freedom thing of, he should be free from various things, and he should be free to do various things, of his choosing. That's kind of one of the few things that I would drill into the kids, is that it is such a lie that there's this one pathway for any given thing, and that once you're off that pathway, you've basically screwed up your life for good. Which is something that's really drilled into us in England. I expect it's a middle class thing, right? I expect that the upper class tells their parents, whatever you want, you can buy your way in. The working class maybe tells the kids, you can work hard and get somewhere. The middle class, we tell the kids, there is the one path. You have to follow it through to university, through to the career, and I think we maybe talked about this on a previous occasion. This idea of gaps in your resume, right? It's a really big cultural thing. oh, you
Someone
can't
just
have
wrote to
any,
me saying,
yeah, you can't have any gaps in your resume. You can't go off backpacking around Europe. There'll be a gap in your resume. And it's like, what the fuck? It's just a bizarre idea. Like, oh, you can't quit the job you hate because there could be a gap in your resume, or people will say, why did you only stick out this job for a month?
Yeah. You'll be suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a bizarre myth that kind of there's this one path. And further to that, I'd say the other myth is that following the path will actually get you to the place you go. I mean, following. If you think of here's a bizarre example. In England, you can go to university and study journalism. There are journalist degrees. Now, no journalist in England has ever come from having a journalism degree, right? So in England, if you want to be a journalist, there's basically two routes. You can go to one of the better universities and study English, or you can work your way up through local media, doing covering the stories of like the cat stuck up the tree or whatever. Well, going to university and studying journalism is not a path into journalism. Just like the path that's laid out is not actually a particularly good one. Maybe a more surprising example for your listener is accountancy. In England, you can go and do an accountancy degree, and yet most of the people working in accountancy will have done a different degree and in a 1-year accountancy conversion course just to get the certificate. So often the path laid out by society is not really relevant anyway. So yeah, I guess that's when I think about what I want for my children. I want them to understand that there are an infinite variety of paths, and they're free to make their own paths, reroute paths, destroy paths, whatever. And no matter what you do, as long as you're alive, you've still got unlimited possibilities, really.
Yeah, I see where within this freedom and having this freedom and understanding it, there's an empowerment that you want them to have. Over their own existence.
Yeah, and empowerment, and also I guess related to that is this thing of being able to see the things that the other people can't see. So for me, a big part of that was finding out about the underground. That there's this whole other world there. Think about alternative media. That you can go online and see. You can see news reports from people who actually live in the cities, not the reporter from Washington DC who's visiting this small town. Right. You can read someone's blog who actually lived on the street where the incident happened or whatever it was.
Right. The original promise of the internet.
Yeah. But it is all there. It's maybe we could say it's been drowned out by a sea of crap. But it's that thing of looking further than other people look, I guess. When we walk around, a lot, like me and my kids, we're always looking at the stuff that regular people wouldn't look at. Obviously, the part of that is the hacker thing of, we're very interested in infrastructure. Why are there antennas on the vending machines? How does the clock in the park know what time it is? How does the train system work? All that kind of stuff. But then there's also all the other kind of layers that you start looking through. You look at the people walking on the street, where are they going? What are they doing? What's their life like? So there's that whole kind of multi-layer reality going on. And I think the vast majority of people are completely blind to that, despite the fact that, we have, and in fact, it was something that you said to Gabe before was, we have this incredible ability to find all this information on Google, and yet most people still seem to live in a life where they have, no access to information at all.
No idea.
They're living in
the powerlessness feeling. Having so much power and feeling like you have none.
Being in that echo chamber, that little echo chamber, the Facebook bubble or whatever it is. It's bizarre, really.
Yeah, and it sounds like, the sort of seeds that you're planting could be relevant for a better future, I would say, not just for your children, but perhaps for other people who get inspired and who do something similar or that has similar outcomes. The whole idea of understanding the world that we live in besides just living in it, which is, of course, what most people do. Anyway, Matthew, I want to wrap it up at this point, although I know there's always more we can get into when it comes to the education, the raising of children, and we'll do more. So in terms of homeschooling, I think this has been, for a lot of people listening, a great journey through part of your experience. So yeah, thanks for sharing, and let's do more.
Oh, thanks always for having me on your podcast. And yeah, I'd love to do maybe a whole other episode on technology and education, because I think that,
that sounds good. That sounds good. And let's do a relevant plug. As people have no doubt heard on previous programs, you're funding your treatment to a large extent, and you could use people's help. So we got Matthew Dons, DONS.org is where people could go and be part of it, help basically keep it with the funding side of it. And we've had already, I think, quite a few people from all over the world getting involved. So by all means, wherever you are, I think your participation is very much appreciated.
Well, yeah, thanks so much. And it's that website forwards to a GoFundMe page where people can see video updates and that kind of thing of what's going on with me, and they can make a donation if they wish, or share that link on Facebook or whatever is super helpful. So, I mean, Matthew Dons on YouTube, so you could just search for Matthew
I'll
Dons,
put a link.
or dying of cancer in Japan or whatever.
Yeah. But you've done already many topics and video as you talk about it, and you'll even get to occasionally see the children who appear. So that's an added bonus.
Yeah, there's a wide range of videos, not just cancer and death related. There's some other interesting stuff too.
Yeah. All right, Matthew. I'll say goodbye for now for the podcast, but thanks as always, and more soon.
Yeah, look forward to it.
That's your answer to everything. Tattoo it on your forehead. Your revolution is over, Mr. Lebowski. Condolences. The bomb's lost. My advice to you is to do what your parents did. Get a job, sir. The bombs will always lose. Do you hear me, Lebowski?